Let me start the story. Again, his phone rang. It was just before midnight. An auspicious full moon night of December had suddenly turned into an ominous night. I flung the receiver down, or else he would keep on badgering me throughout the night, perhaps for some leaker then, inebriated and out of his senses. All of a sudden, his face flashed before my eyes, along with his lengthy letters written to me on pink rose-petal letterheads. Posted somewhere in distant mountainous Kashmir Valley, we had come in contact with one such December night for a few hours only at Railway's waiting station. He was wearing a pearl-hued, glistening jacket on top of his olive green army uniform, which I had never seen anyone else wearing before. He was gazing at everyone around quietly with a Roald Dahl book in his hand. He would ask others from time to time about their destination and would narrate his experiences in those places he was posted in. Though he said he hailed from the northeast, he did not have the sturdy features of a mountainous people, their squint eyes, their radiant golden complexion. Rather, he was handsome, a gallant soldier, and quite muscular. His fingers were long and attractive, exuding a romantic aura about him. I too liked his demeanor. I liked his glancing, and I liked to keep on glancing at him from time to time. That is why, when he handed me a small piece of paper and asked me to write my name, address, and phone number on it at 3:45 in the night. I wrote it down impulsively without any query, as if I was hypnotized. I had forgotten all the restrictions that a girl from a conservative family is trained upon, about sharing even a few words with strangers. I was captivated by his demeanor, attire, and personality. Everything about him seemed so charming. I was most fascinated by his relatively large mouth organ, on which he played old Hindi film songs, adding lilt to such a wintry, dreadful night at the railway station. Only he could have sprayed perfume and budding flowers with his music. After that, he wrote a letter to me, 8 pages on pink paper. It was for the first time that someone had written to me with such warmth. This did not come in usual postal envelope, but was in an outer-hued, small official envelope. The wrapper had reached me in a torn condition. My mother noticed it fast, the letter of temptation, and she became naturally very annoyed. But his letter did not contain anything at all that could cause such displeasure or unease. He had written about the army, the monotonous life, and the hardship. He had met with a minor accident and was writing to me from his hospital bed. God knows why. He would never forget my eyes and my Rapunzel hair that hung in a braid to my wrist those days. He wrote that except for his barracks, the place was depressingly desolate. The ice-capped mountains looked beautiful from a distance. Otherwise, they burn your skin like fire. When the nights deepened, his agony became more acute. He would wait for my response and would even write that my letter seemed like Kesar garden flower. Kesar the garden grown oxygen, a letter from a strange land and a special young woman's sentimental feelings. I don't know why I never replied. I was probably very scared. I was apprehensive that he would reply to my letters, and I lacked the courage to reveal my feelings. One night, our phone rang. I picked it up and heard Padmaji. I was stupefied, as if hit by a cloudburst. Those days, a phone call in the drawing room would make everyone in the family rush there. And then it was a late night in winter. Those phone calls seemed more horrifying than the dreadful hooting of an owl. Before he could utter any word, I spoke with a very stern voice, like that of a portly warden of my lady's hostel. Please do not call so late in the night. Our family decorum does not allow this. I signed off. And to disperse any streak of doubt from the watchful family, I banged the phone down noisily. Since then, my mother has been fuming and shrieking over the man. He, who had already sent me 4 letters and had been praising me unrestrained, unfettered. After 10 years, his letters arrived again. This time he was rueful, each word echoing his apology for his behavior 100 times. I could imagine him weeping silently and playing his mouth organ soulfully among the midst of a rows of pines. I also pitied him and was sad in equal measure. When you deliberately hurt someone deeply, sadness becomes a part of you too. I presumed you would never dare to write me again. However, he continued writing to me without fail from some undisclosed army cantonments or barracks for a long time. I could sense he was attracted by my charms, even by my love. Perhaps he was reminded of someone very dear to him when he saw me. Possibly my eyes and my long hair, neatly tied up in a thick braid, resembled someone he had known in the past. He had mentioned his family. It was a large one, and they lived in a huge palatial mansion. His wife was the only daughter of his rich father-in-law, and she was an amazing singer. She was pampered and treated like a delicate flower. Since I had seen him, and I wondered how such a gracefully handsome man could cope with the disciplined, rigorous life of the army. He had mentioned that he was a good singer. He had a baritone voice. I could not imagine what pitch or what nuances his baritone might reach as he sang. I deliberately posed form for him, perhaps to prepare myself for my compulsive vows to avoid him effortlessly in due course. His fantasy of walking hand in hand in saffron and rose gardens and in pine forest on a moonlit night, or trying to catch a glimpse of views some other consolations did not cut any ice with me. I thought he was exaggerating his dreams, and yet he kept on writing to me for months together. Many times they appeared as echoes of his earlier post, as he wrote identical words to express the same feelings. After 17 years, when he had phoned to wish me on Holi, which he never failed to phone me for the occasion, though my phone was dead most of the time, I told him, I will visit your state to meet you. He was astonished and thought I was only teasing him, as I lived in a very small hamlet in Orissa and he lived in the far-off Naga hills. But he went on describing in his usual warm and friendly way that he would be delighted to see me. He was sad to know that I had not married yet, and he said had he married me, he would have crystallized his dreams and roamed in the clouds and east the stars all the time. It was quite late in the night. I had not given him my cell phone number yet. He perhaps could never believe that I would negotiate such a distance through adverse terrain to meet him. How could he imagine that a girl from a simple middle-class Indian family would dare to meet a man he barely knew at such a distant destination? I noted down the name of his village, Khatkati. Some days ago, I confided to an Assamese friend that I wished to visit Dimapur. My lovers lived there, I said. He did not even try to probe any further for any details and was ready to accompany me. We set out for Dimapur. It was quite a distance from Guwahati. The route resembles the terrains of Orissa. For miles, the stretches of rice fields and plains, warmer, and the anxiety all through these hours was sticking inside me. My boyfriend, he was waiting for me at the railway station at Dimapur. The man I was looking forward to meeting again so anxiously had retained the same clear-cut army hairstyle. He had a refined look and his eyes glittered. Instead of that purely white drape, he was now wearing a beautiful red and black striped Naga jacket. I had changed a lot in appearance. I had cropped my hair, grown down, and wore powered glasses. I guessed he would not recognize me instantly, but he stooped a little and whispered, Padmaji. When he saw my face lighten up, he immediately knew I was the same person, but an altered and mature version of that slender girl he had met 17 years ago. We headed for a Plus Hotel for lunch. It was a wonderfully done-up location, quite vibrant. Antiram flowers were blooming in vivid blood-red hues, and birds of paradise flowers were dazzling. The leaves seemed greener, the sky a shade deeper blue, and the rain seemed to me more lucid and fresh. In the distant hills, clouds settled in so many layers. He ordered some drinks and ate to his heart's content. He advised us to taste the locally brewed rice beer and pork curry. That is a delicacy there, he maintained. He was ready to splurge on hospitality towards my Assamese friend, and he was cracking jokes with the same panacea as he had done before. He said, if one has an immense zest for life and a flair for dance and music and is lucky to find love, there is no reason why anybody should feel ever miserable. I wonder how this man could afford to be so nonchalant all the time. It is a fact that he had in him the skills to charm any woman with his personality. He complained to my Assamese friend now how I had never replied to his numerous letters and never phoned him and things like that. Dusk was looming, and I was desperate to meet his wife and see his family in his house. I wanted to see the woman who was endowed with such a range of artistic gifts as he had described. 1,000 queries rose in me. When my Assamese friend left us alone for a brief spell, he came closer and asked slyly, Padmaji, can you lend me 2,000 rupees only? I have forgotten to carry my wallet with me. I will return it tomorrow morning. I was feeling uncomfortable mentioning this before your friend. I gave him the money without a word. He paid the restaurant bill. I did not find my Assamese friend very enthusiastic about this friend of mine. He appeared to be more concerned about my comfort and happiness and my dignity. We walked a little distance to see my friend up. It was raining. We did not find any cars waiting for my friend to take him home. I told him that we would be ready by 8 in the next morning, and he replied he would himself come and take us to his village. Nights descent very early in Dimapur. The roads become deserted. By 8 o'clock, subs pull down their shutters. This is a strange place, a trade junction for Assam, Burma, Manipur and Nagaland. Here, drug traffickers merely run theatre, and a simple brawl among the people leads to a dance with knives and daggers. My Assamese friend smiled and asked, is this man really your boyfriend? I told him the truth. No, 17 years ago, I had met him in the waiting room in the New Delhi railway station. Since I was visiting this part of India, I felt tempted to see him to get a first-hand impression of his real life and his dreams. He sighed and murmured, why did this gentleman disappear? And Nagaland is such a disturbed area to travel in these days at night. I bade him good night and requested that he come by 8 o'clock the next day. I went to sleep immediately afterwards as I was dog tired. It was past 8:30 in the morning. By the time we finished breakfast of toast and omelets, we were waiting for my army friend to arrive. But there was no trace of this man who drooled over his Padmasi. My friend could sense my uneasiness and did not say anything, as if it were his responsibility to fulfill my dreams. I was beginning to believe that he had cheated me. The day before, he had borrowed 2,000 rupees from me, but there was no sign of him returning it. I felt humiliated. And yet, as we knew the name of the village, we decided to go on our own to visit it, 18 miles away. The dense foliage and the greenery along the roadside and the deep purple and pink hued Christmas flowers all over were a sight to behold and captivated us. The wooden houses with boundary walls made of bamboo strips were so smooth and beautiful, so were the Nagas, hardworking and extremely hospitable. We did not find it very difficult to locate his house in Khatkati village. He was very popular. At the fringe of the village was a three-room house, walled by stone. There was a small pond nestling beside the house with a concrete bench nearby. He was not home when we reached there. Two elderly couples were playing cards in the mild sun, huddled together in the chilly morning. From time to time, they called out to their little granddaughter and ordered cups of tea. They were punctuating their words with the choicest expletives. They were the parents of my friend and his wife, about whom I had heard so much before. Within a few years, they will go heavenwards, one after the other. Before that, they might become immobile and would have to depend on others. Four elderly people lived together in a love bond. But Srila, his wife, did not react in a way to their constant grumbling. Neither she muttered anything behind their backs like many other women in similar circumstances would do. She was silent about their helplessness and her predicament. She had to shoulder all their family responsibilities against all odds and look after her growing children. Death and life flowed parallel at the same time for her. The toughest part was the acute penury. One glance at them said it all. It was difficult for them to have even a full meal every day. There was a charming smile permanently etched in Srila's eyes and her lips all the time. She looked like a beautiful unsullied flower. They were Christians. They did not have much to go by, only some bedding to keep on and some farming implements and a few tin trunks with some clothes. The house was of wood, including the floors. On the slanting roof, they grew creepers of white gold and some wild flowers of azure hues. Behind the main house was a kitchen garden where they grew some vegetables and two rows of corn, all around colorful wildflowers festooned landscape. Although the house was distinguishable from a distance, it was very simple and unenviable and anonymous. It was Srila who looked after the household. She also had to supplement the household expenses by working part-time as a nurse in the local infirmary. She had to undergo bone-breaking hardship every day, and the nights when her husband stroked her with his long, pointed, affectionate fingers, she would go off to sleep instantly. She did not know when it was wrong. Her husband's embrace was like an angel's companionship for her. She loved him deeply. How else could she be so hospitable to us, especially to a woman she was introduced to as her husband's friend? Her husband was out at that time. His colorful jacket was hanging on the wall the one he had worn the day before when he had come to see us. No doubt, Raz had never mentioned a word about us to his wife. Leave alone returning to my 2,000 rupees, he would not have met us again. I could never have imagined that the reality of his house could be so green. Until then, I was steadily jealous of his wife and his family. I was also fancying myself to be romantically linked to him, although I never ever replied to any of his letters and never treasured them, I awaited them nonetheless. It was a fact that though he had been expelled from his armed forces for his drinking and womanizing, he would never ill-treat his wife, beat her in a drunken state, or ever speak a cruel word to her. It was apparent in the face of his wife, which reflected not even a trace of his behavior. Just then, he appeared like a bolt from blue. He brought some fish he had caught in the nearby stream. He kept himself busy with such small jobs apart from earning his livelihood. With a petty supply business in the area and being active in the local politics, he could cope with his poverty without doubt. While learning over his fame, his eyes fell on us. He turned pale with embarrassment and fright. His abject penury was in complete contrast to a wealthy palatial building he had been telling us all these years. I was wondering about myself now. How could I have managed in Srila's place? Could I ever be happy? It is not that I am entirely comfortable in my lifestyle, but to be the wife of even beloved of such an impostor? And what thoughts crossed my mind that time? He was standing so helplessly there, as if rooted to the ground, with his outstretched jaw. There was this shadowing sense of losing everything in a flash. This ugly and pathetic turn of events made me numb with sadness. Perhaps he was reminded of my words then. I had told him on phone that I would surely visit his home one day and when I got a chance. This is a strange commitment to love. But how strange are the ways of life? It does not hesitate to savor the wings of a happy butterfly flitting happily from corner to corner. There was pain everywhere, spreading like mellow sunshine. The moon was fresh, its shadows stretched up to the distant mountains. Although we stood facing each other like the mirrors, we could not see each other's faces. While returning, my astonished friend took my cold hands and with some warmth said, "Don't lose heart. Thank God, his wife is deaf and dumb." There is a saying that neighbors can lie at the drop of a hat.
And beautiful mine, and we could feel pathos, and we could also feel wishful love between the characters. Beautifully written and beautifully narrated. So in the interest of time, I would request all the speakers to kindly stick to the time, and we are very happy and privileged that our chair, Mamta Kalia ji, is with us. Kindly applaud her with a big round of applause. आपकी बहुत अच्छी प्रतीक्षा थी मैम, और मुझे बहुत खुशी हो रही है। दूरदर्शन में 2013 में आपसे साक्षात्कार हुआ था और आज मिलना हो रहा है। सत्र की अध्यक्षता आप कर रही हैं। हमारे बीच आप सभी स्पीकर से आपका परिचय है। मोनालिसा जी अपना कहानी पाठ कर चुकी हैं, अरुणोदय सर कर चुके हैं, और राय सर कर चुके हैं। अगर आपकी अनुमति हो तो मैं अगले स्पीकर को बुलाऊं या आप बुलाना चाहेंगे? मैं बुला सकती हूँ। हाँ जी, हाँ जी, बिल्कुल। अब हम न्योता देंगे भगवान अटलानी जी को कि वो यहाँ मंच पर आएँ और अपना कहानी पाठ करें। तालियों के साथ स्वागत कीजिएगा।
साहित्य अकादमी ने 10 मिनट में कहानी को समेटने की बात बहुत मुश्किल कहानी, लेकिन कोशिश करेगा। मूल सिंह की कहानी का शीर्षक है या अंग्रेजी में अगर कहें तो नेक्स्ट, और हिंदी में मैंने इसका शीर्षक दिया है समझा। भविष्य क्या होता है? भविष्य कुछ मैं नहीं जानता, मुझे बस इतना पता है कि कुछ बनना है। क्या बनोगे? ऐसी अजीब अजीब बातें कर रहा है आज। हम इतने हाथ बढ़ाकर उसके मन तक कुछ हुआ, तबियत तो ठीक है ना कि वो खामोशी से देखता रहा, धीरे धीरे बोला, तो तू समझेगा नहीं होगा। बताया नहीं तो बोलूँगा कैसे? वह खड़ा हो गया, अभी जाना है, बाद में बात। कैरियर, जॉब, पैकेज, पद, प्रतिष्ठा, बड़ा बनने की तमन्ना, बस यही विषय होते थे आजकल मित्र मंडली की बातचीत। सब पढ़े लिखे, शैक्षणिक योग्यताओं का बुलंदा सबके पास था। संदर्भों, रसूखातों, कोशिशों के बूते पर हर एक की आशंकाओं से घिरा भविष्य कभी चमकता और कभी धूमिल या लवलुहान नजर आता था। सब जुटे हुए थे। हर तरह की संभावनाओं के बीच एक उम्मीद थी जो चैन देने नहीं दी। इसलिए टुकड़े टुकड़े अतीत की जानकारी होने के बावजूद उसने कभी गौर नहीं किया था। पिता का नाम शहर के बड़े व्यापारियों में शुमार होता है। दादा अंग्रेजों के जमाने के ICS थे। परदादा को अंग्रेजों ने राय बहादुर के खिताब से नवाजा था। आज ईर्ष्या की जाए, इतनी धन संपत्ति सुविधाएं उपलब्ध है। दादा के ज़माने में इससे ज़्यादा रही होंगी और दादा के ज़माने में इससे भी ज़्यादा रही होगी। सामाजिक रुतबा, प्रतिष्ठा, दबदबा जितना आज है, दादा के पास इससे कई गुना अधिक रहा। शायद परदादा के पास उससे भी ज़्यादा रहा होगा। हैसियत रही होगी तभी तो राय बहादुर थे। समाज में विशिष्ट स्थान रहा होगा। अंग्रेज उपाधि देश इस दृष्टि से अनेक खासियतें, अनेक गुण रहे होंगे परदादा। उसने दादा को बचपन में देखा, ज़्यादा कुछ याद नहीं। गोरा रंग, एकहरा बदन, लंबा कद, क्लीन शेव, प्रभावशाली व्यक्तित्व। सौम्य दादाजी के बारे में इससे अधिक उसकी स्मृति में नहीं है। परदादा राय बहादुर परदादा कैसे रहे होंगे? आवाज या लहजा रोड़ा था या विनम्र? सूट टाई पहनते थे या कुछ और? चश्मा लगाते थे या नहीं? राय बहादुर थे इसलिए पैसे वाले तो वही ही होंगे, मगर अर्थोपार्जन के लिए करते क्या थे? जो बिल दादाजी का बनता है वैसा कुछ भी नहीं होता है परदादा के मामले में। दादा व परदादा के नाम उसे मालूम है। उनके पिता, दादा, परदादा या उनके भी पूर्वजों का नाम तक नहीं पता है उसे। हो सकता है अपने दौर के महत्वपूर्ण व्यक्ति रहे हैं उनमें से कोई, मगर सृष्टि का चक्र ऐसे अज्ञात में ले गया है उस कोई को कि नामो निशान तक नहीं है उसका। तुलना की जाए तो परदादा का जो मुकाम हासिल था, दादा उससे कम करते। दादा का जो रुतबा था पिता उससे पीछे, वह स्वयं कहाँ हो, ऊपर या नीचे। आज तक कुछ ठीक है, मगर जहाँ पहले था उससे पीछे है। 3 पीढ़ियाँ एक एक सीढ़ी नीचे होती है, 4थी पीढ़ी ऊपर चढ़ेगी या नीचे जाएगी। वर्तमान प्रतियोगी दौर में कितने दमखम के साथ स्थापित कर पाएगा तो पिता के व्यापार को संभालेगा तो क्या उनसे ज़्यादा ऊंचाइयाँ दे पाएगा। व्यापार के रंग ढंग, तौर तरीके, नियम कानून और सलीके इतनी तेजी से बदल रहे हैं कि विरासत को संभालना बहुत कठिन हो जा रहा है। उसे पता है कि समवयस्क इस तरह की बातों को सुनकर मजाक उड़ाएंगे। आने वाले कल के सपनों की मरीचिका मित्रों को स्वीकार करने को दूर सोचने व विचार करने भी नहीं देगी। इस अज्ञात से अज्ञात की अनिवार्य यात्रा के मोहरे बात करेंगे। अमित को छोड़कर पैदल ही चल पड़ा था, घर से पूरी जाना नहीं थी। भीड़ भाड़ बड़ी सड़क के किनारे चलते हुए वह विचारों के प्रवाह में डूब उतर रहा था। अचानक एक मोटरसाइकिल उसे रगड़ खाती हुई निकल गई। धक्का लगा, गिरा नहीं, गिरता तो हो सकता है किसी न किसी वाहन की चपेट में आ जाता। मर जाता, मरता नहीं तो जय से पड़ता, हो सकता है हमेशा के लिए अपंग हो जाता, पर निर्भर न पड़ता। पता नहीं कोई ढंग की नौकरी या व्यापार करने की इजाजत शरीर देता है, जीना मुहाल हो जाता। जिस सुखी जीवन की को लेकर आकृति भाव है, दूर की गोली बन जाता। एक ध्यान आया, अभी थोड़ी देर पहले भविष्य के संदर्भ में कई प्रश्नों से मत एक छोटी सी घटना में आशंकाओं के जिन पहाड़ों को खड़ा कर दिया, उसके कारण क्यों भूल गया और उन प्रश्नों को अचानक क्यों एहसास जाए उसके मन में कि भविष्य का महत्वपूर्ण नहीं है, वर्तमान है, और वर्तमान है इसलिए भविष्य भी है। वर्तमान को सजाने संवारने के लिए देखा गया सपना है भविष्य। उसने जेब से मोबाइल निकाला और अमित का नंबर मिला दिया। तुरंत बिजली पहुंची। रास्ते चलते बात करने के कारण कोई वाहन टक्कर न मार दे, मुस्कुराते हुए वह फुटपाथ पर चल गया। हेलो, दूसरी तरफ अमित था। कैसा है अमित? जैसा कुछ हो गया था वैसा ही हूँ, मगर फोन करके ये सवाल क्यों पूछा है? यह कहने के लिए कभी थोड़ी देर पहले जो बेतुकी बातें मैं कर रहा था उनका कोई मतलब नहीं। वैसे तो तू आजकल बेतुकी बातें करता है, मगर बता कौन सी बेतुकी बातें की थी तूने थोड़ी देर पहले? मुझे तो याद नहीं है। अरे भविष्य को लेकर तो सवाल पूछे थे ना मैंने, तो भविष्य की हमें होती है यार, तो कौन से नहीं बात कर रहा है? मैं भी तो यही कर रहा था। हाँ, अपने सहमत नहीं लगता है कुछ ज़्यादा ही ट्रांसफर हो गया, वो अच्छे का गया। अमित बोलता जा रहा था, छोड़ अब सब बातें पता क्या तेरा पिला रहा है, कोई पार्टी क्या दे, ये बीड़ी का तभी तेरा दिमाग ठीक होगा, बस जोर से ऐसा मैं अभी आता हूँ। अभी आकर क्या करेगा, तेरे दूसरे यार दोस्त मर गए क्या, उससे सोचा तो मैं ठीक ही तो कहता, दोस्त साथ नहीं होंगे तो यह पल कल कैसे बनेगा।
और वो भी नॉर्थ बात नहीं है, मेरा एक कहना है कि आप वहाँ
So coffee house also there still was two situations in life, and you are a witness to both the situations.
You have also written a novel, Dayanadi Hridaya, The Heart of Dayanadi, which is a very important text for me. That's all about the life and times of Emperor Ashoka, and you in the novel you are drawing the pitiable picture of how Kalinga looks. But one thing which struck me in the novel is the appearance of the madman. Okay, there is a madman who is appearing. He cannot articulate properly, but yet by looking at the carcasses around and by looking at the widows and all those things, he tries to know, he crosses the threshold of madness. What made you think of Ashoka and also Kalinga and also to write a fiction? Not a poem, not a big poem.
Man actually crosses the threshold of madness to become a prophet.
Yes.
Because the prophet stage is beyond madness.
Yes.
It is meta madness, if I may use the new word. So that is a prophet. He prophesies. My fascination with Ashoka is not that what we did as Emperor Ashoka the Great. And of course all of us have read in the textbooks or in memoirs. But then my mind was fascinated by that one particular moment in his life, whereas a very triumphant emperor, triumphant king, subjugating Kalinga after a great resistance, like Vietnam's resistance to America, he subdues Kalinga. And I was reminded of one sentence which I learned long ago. We don't remember most of the stuff we studied in our classrooms. But there was an essay by H.G. Wells, which I studied in my pre-degree class. Maybe from the pre-degree class, this is the only thing I remember. Where he says, rarely in history, there is an emperor who in the height of his triumph undergoes introspection and transformation. Triumph does not make you introspect. It is defeat that makes you introspect. That thing somehow struck with me. And when I visited Orissa, I saw this river which was very meaningfully called Daya, river Daya. Daya in Malayalam is Daya is compassion. And Ashoka transforms himself into a compassionate being, thanks to Buddha's influence. So my focus, or if I may use a cinematic terminology, the camera of my mind zooms into his mind, into Ashoka's mind, and tries to understand what must have triggered this kind of introspection. Not only introspection leading him to not pronounce his victory, but to transform the victory into a kind of moral penance, and transforming entire administration. That is something remarkable. It's not easy for a king. So I was fascinated by that change. And so I had to create imaginary scenes, imaginary characters who borders on madness, but nevertheless a prophet. And that is interesting. Even now this kind of transformation fascinates.
That's very interesting. How we can succeed as two Malayalam film songwriters? Of course, we had a plethora of Malayalam poets succeeded. For instance, Maya Ramavarma, what in the poet. And the next person, if anyone asks, perhaps it would be you. And we have very good Malayalam poets who miserably fail as film songwriters also. One good Malayalam poet right now who is also a very good film songwriter is my close friend. We write poetry together, is Rafi Karanthai. How do the language of writing film songs and at the same time writing poetry?
See, these are two things. As Vaidya was fond of saying, where a film song is applied poetry and all that. I would say that it's a commission work. But there are commission works also. So somebody here. So it's a commission work. The diction of film song is 25 years older to Malayalam contemporary poetic fiction. If I am aware of that, then there is no contradiction. I should not be writing poetry using the diction of my film songs, nor should I be writing film songs in the diction of my poetry. In fact, when I write some of the film songs, one of the biggest concerns most of the time I hear is that standard quality. The standard is high. You bring it down. Malayalam film songs, or for that matter, any film song, is 25 years behind you in the choice of imagery, in the choice of diction, everything. Because after all, it is meant for a different purpose. Used to do. Maybe it is romantic, no doubt. I will not allow that kind of diction in my poetry. As I said, it has to be contemporary. Whereas film songs need not be as old as Vaila Ramavarma or Devi Bhaskar and Day, but I have tried to develop my own diction, which is neither too old nor too postmodern.
Would you say this is true when you attempt a translation also? Because when I read Gitanjali, one thing I noticed was you try to maintain a kind of a diction which can be equivalent to a wider Malayali audience. So the translation is not meant for a peculiar kind of a target audience, a wider Malayali audience. And you try to maintain a kind of a rhythm also in Gitanjali, because Gitanjali has been translated before also, but there are different ways of approaching Gitanjali. Right, and we had a plethora of Bengal translations into Malayalam by many others.
There are 23 translations
Yes,
in Malayalam from eminent poets like Shangarakurupu,
Exactly. He was the first person. Jagannathan was the first person.
Yes,
Started.
and most of the people have translated the Gitanjali in Bengali, which is not the Gitanjali which has been Nobel Prize.
No.
That's a combination of 13 words. Anyway, coming to the translation, I should pay my tribute to Dr. Ayyappa Panicker for making me do a good translation. I translated Gitanjali out of my great fascination for Tagore. I gave it to Ayyappa Panicker for I think no. With his characteristic smile, he returned it to me saying that wonderful translation. It would have been more wonderful had it been 50 years ago. That is Ayyappa Panicker. I said, sir, what is the problem with this translation? He said, your diction is old. Generation of translation. So therefore, translating the language to generation. But I argued with him. I said, sir, Tagore is romantic, so my diction will have to be romantic. He said, who said you have to be romantic? I am only talking about the diction. You can still be romantic. You can still be Tagorean. So it took me, you believe it or not, it took me exactly 1 year. More than 300 days to translate 103 verses. And when I gave it back to Ayyappa Panicker, I was on a sabbatical in the UK. I came back and gave it to him. He was very happy. He was very happy. He offered to write a forward because he said this is how I did. So I'm excited to say that my home is Ayyappa Panicker. This man is a genius. Of course, thou hast made me in the first sentence of Gitanjali. Thou hast made me in this. So I have translated until I answered this. So Panicker sir asks, endless in time or in space? Is there a dimension to that? I never thought about that.
Very tricky way of catching her.
So finally we agreed on a mystery.
And I don't have to tell this audience that Ayyappa Panicker was very tough.
Jansi is there.
Yeah, Jansi ma'am is here.
Recalling Ayyappa Panicker.
Right. Ayyappa Panicker was our mentor and he was a very tough taskmaster, no doubt of it. And that also makes me wonder why you did not attempt to translate any foreign writers, foreign poets. You have read several foreign poets. But why was there any
I have attempted Gaganji.
Oh,
I got it
Gaganji.
because I like the poetry. I got it in English.
Gaganji is very much our Gaganji.
So I somehow related to that poetry without a permission. I translated and published it in Malayalam medium.
Right.
Because it was very fascinating.
So now we can perform the values, right?
But then, I'll tell you one more here. I'll tell you my philosophy of translation. I have translated Tagore. I have translated Rumi. I have translated Gibran. I have translated Kabir. I have translated Lao Tzu's book. These are the writers whom I have generally translated. Then Omar Khayyam also I did. I was wondering myself, what is it that hooks me or attracts me to this kind of works? And what are these kind of works? They are spiritual. There is a element of spirituality. Whereas my poetry is anything but spiritual. There is no spirituality. I cannot say that my poems are spiritual. But Tagore, Kabir, Gibran, Rumi, all these poets, they talk about something different, something aspirational for me. I have not reached that, but I understand their aspiration. That is my aspirational poetry. I cannot write like Tagore, I cannot write like Rumi because I do not have that kind of metaphysical or mystical experience. For me, it is an intellectual exercise. Mysticism, for me, what they have understood intuitively is for me an intellectual construct. Intellectual construct and mysticism and the real experience of these things are different. So it is my aspiration. I want to follow Gibran. I want to follow Tagore. For example, Gibran is a wonderful book, not only Prophet. Prophet, of course, is more popular, but it's more the great book. His masterpiece, I would say, is Jesus, the Son of Man.
Yes.
I was so fascinated by this book. It's a big book, 300 pages or so, one of the biggest books, longest books. These books are all small. And translation is such a drudgery, as you know. When a translation is over, you really breathe, you are such relief. But when I finished the last verse of Gibran in Jesus, the Son of Man, I was so sad. I was sad because from tomorrow morning I'm not going to spend time with Gibran and with Jesus. I was in exalted company. It is that kind of ennoblement that takes place with you. It is for that ecstasy that I undertake this kind of translation. Maybe in European your author doesn't excite me so much. Rilke I try to translate, but
Very kind of candid confession, and this is the concluding question, because we are reaching at the end of time. Time has changed, poetry has changed, many things have changed. The ways of reading poetry has also changed, and we have entered into the world of artificial intelligence. In the coming era, one can't be certain that how does one appreciate the aesthetics of poetry, how does one get into poetry, sophisticated mechanisms. So anticipating all these things and having known the fact that all these things are around us, all right, into something else. Lot of transformations of language, linguistics, vernaculars, and the rest of things are taking place. Dangerous kind of a question regarding, dangerous kind of a situation regarding, we are highly getting into a kind of a dystopic world. What can poetry offer in a world of dystopia? How can poetry survive in a world of dystopia? And being as a poet, what is going to be your message to this audience and how poetry should outlive and outlive?
it's a very loaded question, Mr. Vinay, and we have 3 minutes to answer it. I'm not really worried about artificial intelligence, to be frank, as a poet. As a poet, I'm not worried about artificial intelligence, and if poets can make good use of it as a resource, good enough. But don't go for plagiarism. But what I'm worried about is not technologies. Technologies, the great merriment about artificial intelligence will fade out for something else. These are all waves, And what you know as artificial intelligence today will appear as child's play in another 4 years or 5 years. So much more versatile technologies will come. But whatever technologies come, it cannot replace human beings. That is my greatest, what should I say, my belief, my faith. And I think that is a faith of all writers. And that faith is necessary for us to survive. If artificial intelligence is going to take over your literary creation, then we are not dead. Anyway. But I don't think creativity can ever be replaced by art. That is one thing. But what is worrying me is not the technological revolution or upscaling of technology, but the lack of interest in anything humane, in anything that affects human lives, sentiments, the kind of corporate capitalism that is overtaking you and making us into commodities. And the whole life is pivoting around acquiring commodities, making more money, making this thing. So life has become so mechanical. If you go and eavesdrop into a college canteen, you will find very few people talking about poetry. They will be talking about technology or not even politics. Politics also not interesting. They are into so many other pursuits where poetry is an outside. Literature itself is an outside. But then the function of literature and poetry is to reassert your humanity. And I'm sure we might even enter a phase where nobody is interested in anybody else. And that will bring back to focus the urgency of poetry. Have some poetry, have some humanity left in you. I'm sure the love of human beings for human beings will be the assertive call to get back to literature. So I'm not really worried. Of course I am worried because the challenges of poetry, challenges in literature are really true. We have to reassert our humanity and humaneness and compassion in an age where all these virtues do not have any patronage.
Thank you very much, sir, for that very interesting, promising note that poetry will survive, literature will survive, and will have origins, despite the fact that any kind of commodification, and we need to fight. Literature is a mode that should fight against this kind of effectism and commodification. And with that, let me say that we can conclude this session. Thank you very, very much.
Me and thank you Shri Jaikumar for this wonderful conversation. We got a glimpse of the mind of a great poet, and he also gives us hope that we need to reassert humanity.
അതൊരു ഫെമിലിയർ ഓഡിയൻസ് ആണ്.
चेतना नहीं थी। और उस तरह से मतलब बाद में मालूम चला कि यार इतनी बड़ी हस्ती जो है हमारे आसपास।